Hey guys, how's it going? This is HelpfulLockPicker here, and welcome back to my lockpicking homeschool series. The video I have for you today is going over how to tension locks with spool pins. They can be quite different than locks that have all standard pins. I'm going to provide you some tips and tricks so you can start getting open some locks with spool pins very easily. And more information is coming up on this in just a second. Please stay tuned. If you'd like to refresh on how to tension locks with all standard pins, please check out my video number 73. That goes into very much depth on that subject and will really help you get started. What I'd like to do now is first focus on some of the tools that you would use when you're working on locks with spool pins. Typically there are two types of tension wrenches that you will run into. Top of the keyway tensioners that look like this, and then we have bottom of the keyway tensioners that look like this. The top of the keyway tensioners typically come in different sizes. The most popular is about 40 thousandths of an inch and 50 thousandths of an inch. And then you can get the bottom of the keyway tensioners that look like this, or the ones with the twists. My general rule of thumb is I like the one without the twist because it provides greater feedback, and I try to get the thickest and the stiffest tension wrench that I can into my lock to really help provide as much feedback as possible when you're working on the lock. Now what I'd like to do is get into some more detail on opening up locks with spool pins. You may already have a great understanding of how spool pins work, but in summary, they are a security pin that is designed to make lockpicking more difficult and try to make the low-skilled attacks such as raking, rocking, and bumping less effective. What they do is they have a smaller inside diameter and a thicker outside diameter, and they do a really great job at getting stuck up between the plug and the Bible. And when you start to set all of the non-spooled pins in the lock, you'll get a phenomenon called a false set, where the plug will start to open up, but it will not because it will be still stuck on the thinner part of the spool pin. When you're starting to learn to tension locks, trying to get through your false sets and navigating some of the feedback can be quite different than when you are picking locks with standard pins. When you are picking a lock with standard pins, typically you will not get any core movement and the lock will just open up once all the pins are picked. When you're working with a lock with spool pins, you're going to start to get counter rotation back and you'll start to get false sets. This will mean you'll need to start doing a different tensioning technique. When you're working on locks with standard pins, typically you can get away with a static amount of tensioning. But when you start to work on security pins such as spool pins, you'll start to need to vary your tension based on the feedback the lock is providing. What I'd like to do now is show you an example of how I need to vary my tension, and also you can keep note where I have these black lines here so you can start to see how the plug will start to move as we get into different states when we are opening up the lock. So I'm going to start off now with a moderate tension. I'm going to try to set some of the standard pins. So I'm going to start off with pin 1. I just set that, and you're able to see that we just got slight movement on the core, but nothing really that is too appreciable. Then we're going to go on 2, got a slight click, 3, 4. Now let's just go back down the stack. Lifting up 1, I got a really good false set. So now you can see that the lines have started to become separated, and the false set is now attained. Now I cannot keep a very strong amount of tension on this lock because I'm going to need to lift up on the spool pin. I'm going to need to allow the tension wrench to counter rotate back, but I need to keep enough pressure on it so that all the pins do not drop back down, because we're going to need to lift, counter rotate back, and then open up the lock. So we're just going to lift up on each pin and look for the one that starts to rotate back. So let's start off with pin 1. That feels good. 2, that feels good. 3, that feels good. 4, counter rotated back a little bit, and now the lock is open. So that is a quick example of opening up a lock with spool pins and seeing how you need to use variable tension when you are working on the lock. Now what I'd like to do is show you an example of picking a lock with spool pins with bottom of the keyway tension. When it comes to choosing top of the keyway tension versus bottom of the keyway tension, A lot of it is personal preference. I've always found top of the keyway tension just allows a lot more room for you to work on, and sometimes bottom of the keyway tension can cause a phenomenon where you start to bind the core, where you'll put tension on the plug, but it will just be dragging the plug and it will not actually be putting tension on the lock, and it will not be an effective means to get the right amount of tension that you need to get the lock open. Now let's try to pick this lock open and we can see some examples of tensioning it. So I'm just going to set 1, I just got a small little false set, go over to 2, to 3, to 4, to 5. So right now I have a little bit of a false set, as you can see, and I'm just doing light tension. You always want to try to tension the lock with the most amount of tension that you can get away with, but you do not want to be hammering down on it. But once you start to identify some spool pins and you need to get through the counter rotation, you need to be able to lighten up on your tension and allow it to lift back, but you cannot be so light that you're going to drop all of your pins. So you can see that we're in a little bit of a false set now. You can see the lines have started to separate. And let's try to find the pin that we're on. Just because you're in a false set does not mean you are on the last spool pin, and sometimes you're going to get into multiple false sets throughout the picking process. Alright, so pin 3, counter rotating back, I just set that spool pin and the lock has not opened. Now pin 2, I believe, counter rotation back and the lock is now open. But when you first start to work on spool pins, you'll quickly find out how fun they are, and they just offer so much feedback. The counter rotation you get on spool pins is just a lot of fun, and they're just so fun to learn. They can give you some really deep false sets that can be a lot of fun to work on. So you just need to remember that you're always going to be able to find your own amount of tension. It is a very difficult number to quantify, but the general rule of thumb is you want to put in as much tension as you can get away with, but when you're first learning, sometimes less tension is more. But when you're working on a spool pin, and just locks with security pins in general, you need to keep in mind that your tension is going to be variable and not static, and you need to adjust it based off of the feedback the lock is providing you. Alright, so what I'd like to do now is work on a lock that is a really fun lock and a great tool for someone to learn spool pins on. It's a Master Lock 410 lockout tagout. It is a 6-pin core that contains 5 spool pins and 1 lightly serrated pin in chamber 5. It offers really great feedback and can be a really fun lock to learn on. I'm going to use top of the keyway tension, and we're going to see what it takes to get this lock open. I'm going to now start off on pin number 1, and I'm going to use a moderate tension, and I'm going to start to see what it takes to get these open. You can see on 2 I just got some counter rotation. 3, getting counter rotation as well. Not too much on 4, not too much on 5. A small click on 6. Let's go back to 1. Nothing on 1. Nothing on 2. Nothing on 3. Nothing on 4. Nothing on 5. Nothing on 6. Let's just try that out again. Okay, 1's binding. Now I have a small little false set, and getting some counter on 2. So as I start to get the false set and the counter rotation, I just really start to let up on the tension and let the lock do what it needs to do. Counter rotation on 1, and the lock is now open. When people are working on locks with spool pins, often they are just hunting for that false set. They are just opening up the lock until they are able to get that false set, and then they know they are very close. Spool pins can be a little tricky at times, and you can review any of my other videos I've made on them. They are really just fun locks to learn, and I highly recommend that you start working on them and really start practicing them. This Master Lock 410 Lockout Tagout is really one of the best tools for you to learn spool pins on, due to the fact that it's a 6-pin core. It contains 5 spool pins, it has decent tolerances, and it provides really great feedback. The one thing that you need to be careful with is when you open up these locks, you need to make sure that you promptly lock them back up in the correct way, because if you do not, and you start to turn the core over 180, all the driver pins are going to shoot out through the little holes on the bottom of the plug, and then you'll have a rattle and a non-functioning lock. But either way, guys, that is all I have for you today. This has been a few tips and tricks on how to open up locks with spool pins. I really hope that you have found them very helpful, and I really hope that you start to get into spool pins. They are really fun to learn, and they are one of my favorite security pins to work on. But either way, guys, if you have any questions or suggestions, please leave them in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video and you'd like to see more like it, please subscribe. As always, thank you so much for checking out this video. I hope you all have a great day, and just thank you so much for checking this out.